Where in Michigan, Elaine?
Gaylord. My dad was from Ireland.
I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself, and as the Reverend Charles Cowherd, priest in charge here at St. Timothy's. Welcome to all those who are joining us via our live stream. Thank you to St. Isidore's for managing and hosting us this morning. We have a great Sunday Adult Forum today. This is the second of our three-part We Are the Church, You Are the Church, I Am the Church series. So we are doing You Are the Church. And this is the second time we've done this particular topic, which is an ecumenical roundtable 2.0. And so last year we had a number of folks, and this year we have a number of folks who are going to be talking about how they came to the Episcopal Church, how they came to St. Timothy's, their faith background, which is was not originally an Episcopalian. I am a cradle Episcopalian, and that in a quarter will buy you a cup of coffee, and we're seeing how all the different ways that you can journey in your spiritual life and journey towards God. So I'm going to moderate from a seated position, and I'm going to hand this microphone and do make sure that we keep it on for our guests joining us at home. And so the first, I'm just going to ask here for the panelists to introduce themselves and talk about what the denomination they were, quote, born into and how that was different or similar to the Episcopal Church. So Sarah, I'm going to allow you to begin.
Hello. Well, can you hear me through the microphone? Is that working? Yeah. So first of all, I think I just need to give a little introduction about where I come from, because I've got this very English accent, but I'm not actually English. I'm definitely British, but I come from an island called Jersey that is 8 miles off the coast of France, 100 miles from England, and we're not part of the UK. So, and we basically came over with the rest of Normandy in 1066 and became part of the British, what then became the British Empire, and were the only part of France that wasn't conquered back. And it was only about 200 years ago that the French last invaded us to try and conquer us back. So that sort of gives you a little bit of the thing. So I was born into the Church of England because it is British, and we count the monarch of England as our Duke of Normandy. They're not actually the Queen or King, they're the Duke of Normandy. But yet we're still very much, have that still very much English-British influence. So I was born into the Church of England, but basically all my ancestors were French Huguenots. And I think, I don't quite know, I should have looked this one up, but there was a massive influx from France into the Channel Islands at the time of the Huguenots, and basically they all came in and turned Protestant. So one of my particular ancestors, where it is quite well defined, they were actually Catholics in France, was so appalled at how the Catholics were treating the Protestants that they moved to Jersey and became Protestant. And I think a few more of them would have been Protestant in France and were fleeing and came to Jersey and were Protestants. So I think in about the 1700s, you would have had about 95% of the population was Protestant, and then gradually more people have come into the island, and there's probably, it's quite a big Catholic population. A lot of it is actually the Portuguese that have come, and they're all Catholic, but it's now probably about 20%, but it's mainly the influx since then. So originally everyone would have been Protestant. So anyway, I think that's probably enough to start with. So I will.
So my name is John Ellis. I'm a more recent addition to. Is that better? Oh, perfect. My name is Johnny Ellis. I'm a more recent addition to the St. Tim's family, and definitely new to Episcopalianism. So my background, I guess still use terminology, I'm a cradle Christian, but definitely not cradle Episcopalian. I was actually born to a Presbyterian mother and an atheist father. And on one side, very devout Southern Baptist. On the other side, actually had an animist grandfather and a Catholic grandmother. So I grew up in a very mixing bowl type situation for my religious exposure. I had the unique privilege, as I see it, of not being really funneled into one tradition or one belief system, and was actually encouraged to go out and discover and find what I wanted to believe in, which, again, like I said, I thought I took as a privilege, and I still feel like that was a privilege. On the other hand, it kind of gave me a really wide open field to work with. So in that time of growing up, I went to a private Baptist school, Presbyterian, non-denominational, and out of all that, for a while, I just called myself non-denominational because it was much easier than trying to choose one of the myriad of sides that I was exposed to. I also was very fortunate at the schools I went to because they were different denominations. I got a lot of exposure to different theologies, and I really got to dive deep into apologetics and church history and just theology in general, which, again, had the advantage of really expanding my knowledge base. Did not make the waters any clearer in deciding what label to choose for myself. And if anybody is ever willing to listen, I have a whole dissertation on why John Calvin is not my favorite theologian. I'm happy to share with you. But I guess in understanding all of that, I never really found a church that spoke to me. So a lot of my adult spiritual journey was personal study, reading people that have been dead for 100 years and using that to expand my knowledge base. And just, I'd always struggled to find a church that I felt at home in. So fast forward now to 2022, and I'm on the hunt still, looking, and my fiance and I decided to give St. Tim's a shot. And so he, having been Episcopalian for a decade at that point, and me marrying into Episcopalianism, I figured, well, I probably need to see what I'm getting myself into. So agreed to come to St. Tim's, and that kind of became the cap to my journey to Episcopalianism, because I fell in love with this church and the people of this church. And to me, if this was a representation of Episcopalianism, then this is something that I want to be a part of. If we were to dive into theology again, there's still, I don't agree with everything. I don't think we're supposed to agree with everything. I think I would bore Charles if I agreed with everything. But I have to say, if you look at it from a core, right, which in your spiritual journey, you're never going to find anyone that's 100% aligned with you. But if you can find a core that represents what you identify with and what you feel spiritually, the rest is just fun stuff to debate over. And that's a lot of how I feel about here. So since then, I have rapid fire gotten confirmed and church and everything else. And I guess I can claim the Episcopalian label now. But it has been a really cool way to get to find that, though. And through all of this ability to choose my own journey, so to speak, I am very happy with where I am. And with that, I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you. My name is Betty here. I have a little bit different kind of journey. I was not born into any particular religion. My father was in the Navy, and do tell he was Catholic. My mother was Presbyterian. But we traveled around to many different places, and my parents were the type they did not want to push anything on me. They wanted me to learn and find my own way from a religious standpoint. Growing up, I went to many different types of churches, Methodist, I even went to Baptist, Presbyterian. A friend of mine from high school, we went to her church, which was Catholic. So I got to see quite a few different places. I even went to a college in Ohio it's a college in Steubenville at the time, that was run by friars and nuns. So I had some influence. I've always believed in the Lord. I've always believed in heaven. And I kind of did my own thing until I got in my mid-30s. And I decided I needed to settle down to one particular religious organization. And my son at the time was about 8. I was 34, I think. And I found a church in Deal, Maryland, near where I lived, that St. James Parish, Episcopalian. And I really liked it. I felt at home. I felt at peace. And so I got baptized into the Episcopalian Church. And I also had my son baptized at the same time. My parents were our godparents for both of us. And then I kind of fell away from the church for a while, just life in general. And then my husband and I moved here to Herndon about 17 years ago. And my mother came to live with us, and she became ill and came to live with us. And I felt a need to come back to the church. And I had driven past the driveway out here many, many times. And so one Sunday I decided I was going to come, and I've been coming here ever since. I can't seem to tear myself away. Not that I want to. I always felt welcome coming here. The people were very friendly. I've met quite a few. I don't socialize a lot, but coming here, it makes me feel good. It gives me that peaceful feeling again. And so that's my journey.
Thank you, Betty, and thank you, Johnny, and thank you, Sarah. I just say historically that Johnny and Betty, their experience as adult converts and adult baptism into the Christian church, that's actually, that is the norm for the early church. And so in the early church, if you read the New Testament, the problem was that people don't understand why Jews weren't joining Christianity, or weren't whatever verb you want to use there, and it was the Gentiles, which is all of us, that was the area of growth. And so that's what fueled the growth of the church, obviously. And so your guys' experience, I was born into the church. I was baptized as a child. Your experience is actually the norm for the early church, and I think it'll be increasingly the norm for the future church, as the church of the 21st century, or whatever you want to call that. But having said that, we're going to come back to Sarah here, and the historian in me is like, I just can't, all I want to talk about is the Edict of Nantes and Henry IV of Navarre, who said that Paris is worth a mass, and all the French merchants being kicked out. Maybe the most famous Huguenot, other than Sarah, is Paul Revere was a Huguenot. His name was originally like Revoir or something like that. And so the Huguenots were skilled merchants who came to this country and all across the town of Manikin-Sabat outside Richmond. That's a Huguenot settlement. There's Huguenot High School down there. And so the Huguenots, the Catholics kicked them out, and they went everywhere, and they including the Isle of Jersey. And so, Sarah, we're just going to get you to mine that a little deeper, what that tradition is like, and how it's different from either the Church of England or the Episcopal Church here.
So I'm not sure if I can say how different it is from the Church of England. Because it's very much, let me go back a bit. So, a bit like the other two, my father was not particularly Church of England. He termed himself a Califumpian, which is also what his father did, which as far as I can work out, is what you put down for the services. 'Cause when you went into the army, you had to put down a religion. And it was the religion that wasn't atheist, but it had no church. So it was the term for, yes, I believe in God, but there is no church. And he would always laugh that they had beer bottles instead of prayer books and things like that. So that was my father, he wasn't atheist, but he was just completely not into the church, not into the organization, not into anything. And then my mother, who was very religious, who was, very much my religious mentor. Now, her parents had died when she was young, like when she was 6, so she was brought up by her grandmother. So really it is her grandmother who lived to 103, who was still alive when I was little. So she was born in 1871. So that is the person that sort of gave me a lot of the things. So I think I have quite an old tradition of the church, and definitely the parish church that we used to go to when I was small and did Sunday school was like, I was going to say 100 yards from her house. It may be 200 yards, but a very, very easy walk from her house. And I'm pretty sure got married there. My parents got married there. We were christened there. I think both sets of grandparents had been married there. I'm not absolutely sure, but it was very, very much the family church. But it was quite an old-fashioned church. So I think that was probably more the difference between the Episcopal Church and that the services are very similar. So you really don't notice from a service standpoint the difference. The prayer book is different, and I didn't realize until quite recently, things like the Church of England doesn't have Compline. So that's sort of, and I was sort of quite embarrassed the first time I went to Shrymont. I'd never heard of this. How come I'd never heard of this? And I was like, can't be a very good Christian sort of thing. But I actually found out, no, we just don't, it's not in our prayer book. So there are a few differences, but they are extremely minor in terms of service. But obviously, when I came over here, there was still no female priests. You could be a deacon, but you couldn't be a priest as a female. There was, obviously, our head of our church is the monarch, which, while we had our queen, didn't bother me so much, but I always knew that that wasn't going to stay forever. And I don't appreciate the new monarch being head of the church. That sort of gives me some sort of discomfort. What other differences? And the other difference, which is, there's a bit of a funny one. The other difference is you can't take communion until you're confirmed. And that's always caused us a little bit of awkwardness in the fact that our kids have always come up and had communion right from the beginning, and then you go back home, and then we've had to balance out, they're not officially allowed communion. And then they've obviously put an edict, and this sort of explains how the sort of upper church has much more power, I think, in the Church of England than perhaps here. They've put in the edict that you're not allowed to dip your bread in your wine anymore. You've got to drink the wine from the cup. And this is fairly new. So we took my mother to church, and my mother is, 92, hard of hearing, and this, that, and the other. So she didn't understand that this had changed. So we went up to communion, and she went to dip her bread in, and they refused her. But they told her she had to sip the wine. So that's, I think, so that's a silly example in some respects. but it's where there is much more power, I think, behind the diocese than there is in this church.
So are the services, and I'm gonna pronounce it Jersey, and with the R there, are they French speaking or English speaking or?
Well, so all the Church of England services will be English speaking. But that's an interesting question. How long has that happened? Definitely for the whole of my life. They've always been English speaking. We've actually got quite a little bit of an interesting family where I think the issue I think you can see the language change. My great-grandfather and his son died within about 2 years of each other in about 1897, 95, something like that. And we've got the funeral cards from both of them. The father's funeral card is in French, the son's funeral card is in English.
Interesting.
So, that might have been a generational difference, but basically I think that turn of the century, 1897 to 1900, would have been where the language changed from mostly French to mostly English. So I don't know.
Right.
In that time, whether the service would have been in French, but definitely the whole of my parents' lifetime and everything else, all the services have always been in English.
I think I told this to Joe Whedon last year, who participated in this, that most Episcopalians are ardent Anglophiles, so you can do no wrong. Like what you say to all of us is generally we're also, I don't know if I can speak, like closet monarchists too, even as Americans. And so, it's hard for us to wrap our brains around all of this, but appreciate that. I know there are existing Huguenot congregations in New York City and in Charleston that have it's like 300 years or so, this pretty unique thing that kept going, but thank you. So over to Johnny here, and he, sometimes I think I've used this in reference to you, so you won't be offended, but if you can tell that Johnny has what I like to call the ferocity of a convert, in his theological leanings, and so that means that he really cares, which I think is a really neat thing. And so I just, I want to go from there. And, we've spent many a lunch hashing these issues out, and me telling Johnny that most people, it doesn't matter about sanctification, or if you asked the normal parishioner these questions, they would be like, oh, I don't know, and so I appreciate that about you, Johnny. So if you could just talk more about your kind of transition into the Episcopal Church and St. Timothy's, and why and how it was a better fit. I appreciate that.
Yeah, so I would say I've always walked an odd line throughout my entire spiritual journey when I was in the denominational world. The denomination that most attracted me was Catholicism. But as my leanings kind of going through my background, being very, very Protestant, I was never able to fully pull that trigger. Like, they were my favorite churches to go to. I really believe strongly that there is virtue in the aesthetic. I love the ritual, I like the structure, I like the fact that the theology is well articulated, and I have been to many churches that don't have any structure or organization around them, and it's a personality cult of the pastor or preacher or whatever you want to call them determining theology at the pulpit, and that has always made me very, very uncomfortable. So I was trying to find a way, how do I be a Protestant Catholic? And it's not really a thing. So again, kind of circling back and finally taking what probably to most people would seem like a very obvious plunge, but I guess I'm stubborn and I didn't want to do anything that sounded cliche. So when Andrew finally brought me to have exposure to the Episcopalian faith, I found that it actually walked that line, that I was able to maintain my Protestant theology, but also still be exposed to ritual, beauty, the structure, and maybe not quite as defined as the Catholic Church, but a very strongly defined sense of theology. So it really just boiled down to, as I was just saying, debating over little things that this I had developed over time. It's really that 80-20 rule, right? I found 80% of what I wanted as an arbitrary figure. And it should have been more obvious at the time. I feel silly not having tried it early, but it really just fit. The theology made sense. The order of service, by and large, just worked for me. And then these other periphery things, the theology that I'm debating about, isn't even necessarily Episcopalian. It's more ethereal, more philosophical. I just like to debate things. So I need a forum in which to do that, I suppose. But I think that Episcopalianism checked a lot of boxes that I had articulated to myself and others that I maybe necessarily had not. Like, I don't want to oversimplify and say, I just wanted to be Catholic without the baggage of being a Catholic. That's not at all it. But it appealed to me the same way Catholicism appealed to me, but also had the advantage of appealing to me from a theological sense. So it was a really nice harmony of those two things that I had been hunting for very ardently.
Thank you, and I'll just tell a quick story around that. When we did our last confirmation for when the bishop came, I guess that was back in the spring or early summer, and the bishop had all the those about to be confirmed, received, reaffirmed in the toddler room, and we were sitting in a circle, and he gave this beautiful description of baptism and what it entails in confirmation of the historic church. We were all a little nervous, maybe me most of all, because the bishop was here and everything. And then he got done with the story, and then he asked this question, which was a really tough one. Bob was there. It was like, I can't remember what exactly it was, but it was just like, we were all kind of just like, our hearts were thumping, and it was like 10:05, and the service needed to start. And I was like, please, just someone say something. And Johnny answered, like with a really good answer, and I was like, thank the Lord, all of our theological arguments over lunch, came to fruition because you had the courage to answer his question. So I thank you for that. Betty, I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit more about, for everyone, you should have said this at the start that no one has to say anything, but you talk about your family and your how you've kind of your current family and the Episcopal Church, and how you kind of weigh all those things, and how, well, we can go back to that question too, how the Episcopal Church was a better fit for you.
Let's see. Growing up, my father, his parents passed away when he was very young, and he was actually raised in an orphanage in Knightstown in Indiana. And like I said, I do tell he was Catholic, but I don't remember much about going to church when we were young, when my brother and I were young. We lived on Okinawa. I guess I was in like 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. And there I do read, that's the first real memory I have of going to church. But it was on a military base, so it was more non-denominational when we went. And then as I got older and my father retired in Maryland in the Annapolis area, so I kind of grew up there from preteens through high school. And then when I went to Ohio to live with my aunt and uncle, that was where the College of Steubenville was. And going there, with it being a religious school and run by the friars and nuns, required courses were in religion, theology, philosophy, etc. So I took quite a few of those. And that's the initial awakening, I guess, for me. And it wasn't until I moved back in with my parents, with my son when he was a baby, that I came upon St. James Parish. And for me, the dealings with the church, the people, the priest that was there. They just opened their arms to me and welcomed me in. It was a learning factor for me from the Episcopalian standpoint. And I guess I've always, like Johnny a little bit, I wanted Catholicism without being Catholic. And so for me, Episcopalian fit that bill. But in saying that, like I mentioned, I've always believed in God. I've always believed in heaven. I may not know everything there is in the Bible to know. I actually have started reading it again. I have my mother's Bible. I also have some very old family Bibles that my mother had, and I have two Bibles, one that she gave to her father and one she gave to her mother. I know that from the inscriptions inside those Bibles. But my family never forced anything on me. They were always of the ilk of letting me make my own decision, letting me make my own choice. And that to me meant everything. And I say I had my son baptized at the same time I was, but I've also told him that should he decide he does not want to be Episcopalian, that's okay. He needs to do his own belief. And, you know, when I go out to visit, he lives in Denver now with his wife. And when I go out to visit him every year, we go to church. It's not denominational. You know, that's okay. You know, and then I can come back here.
Sorry, John. Yeah.
Anybody who's using the mic, if you're not hearing yourself in the speaker, I can't hear you in the ether. So you specifically, you get a little closer to the folks in the ether can hear you too.
Just don't tell me I have to start over.
No, you just have to say every other word.
Oh, gosh. I'm sorry. I apologize for that. Where was I? When I go to Denver to visit my son every year in December, we go to church, and it's non-denominational. That's what he and his wife and his mother-in-law attend. And like I said, it's okay. It's not Episcopalian, but it's okay. And I do a lot of my own praying. I talk to God when I need to, and I look for answers. I don't always get them, but sometimes I do. I get the guidance that I need in various aspects of my life.
Thank you, Betty. And I should have started off by thanking all of you. You guys are making this look so easy. And I remember last year's panel did the same thing. Just talking about your faith and talking about your spiritual journey is not an easy thing. It's more of a Shrine Mont thing, and it's less like in a church setting where you're going to be live streamed and you have these. Like, you guys are just making it look so easy. So thank you. And I, remember giving my testimony, and Todd's. We're going to ask him to do that in 2 weeks. Todd Gravetti, our organist, is going to. The privilege of Christian leadership is to be able to describe your walk with God, but it's a hard thing. At seminary, the first thing you do and is some version of this, and it becomes, they call it like a spiritual striptease, where like the first person describes their life and the second person describes it, and it's a little more, and then by the 45th person it's like, and then my goldfish died, and then, it's like there's more and more and more, and it's going to be really, really heavy. But you guys are just so artful in your descriptions. That having been said, we're going to open it up to the audience here and the peanut gallery. So, maybe we'll have some sparks fly here. And so, does anyone have a question for our panelists? Johnny, I believe, is going to hand off the mic if someone does. Yeah.
It's been bothering me ever since you mentioned it. What question could the bishop possibly ask that stumped you? And if you don't want to answer it, Johnny, since Johnny did, he can tell you what his answer was.
It was something like, why are you here? Or no, why am I here? Why is the bishop here? And Johnny said, like, the apostolic succession, that the bishop is traced back to St. Peter and Jesus, and one hand laid their hands on one, and it's just, I don't know if that's the answer that he wanted, but that was a good answer, and that was a true answer, I think, so yeah, so is that how you remember it? Vaguely, yeah. So
I have a question back to you on that one. So this is my lack of knowledge of the history of the Episcopal Church. So how does the apostolic succession work for the Episcopal Church? How did that come about?
It's a great question, yeah, and I was with newcomers recently, and they were kind of in the Johnny school. They were rapid fire questioning those sorts of questions. Usually people are like, what time are the services, or like, like that sort of thing. But they were hitting me real hard with, sacraments and that sort of thing, which is great because I, spent 3 years in school doing this, and I love talking about everything. And so Hal's answer is correct, and Sarah's question was about the apostolic succession. And one of the answers I gave to them was, Episcopalianism, Episcopal means bishop, Anglican means English, and so the two descriptors of our church that are very helpful if someone asks you at a cocktail party, or on the airplane, what's Episcopal? You talk about bishops, and you talk about, the line up through the English rite of, so there was bishops all throughout that, and then when the English Reformation happened, this is the easiest way to describe it. The succession was pure because it goes to the Roman Catholic Church, so when we broke off, we were already grafted in, if that makes sense. Yeah. So always my intention with these is not to refight the Protestant Reformation, but ultimately it comes back to that. And then if you really get deep into it, there's some stuff through Scotland and everything. And
that was more the question I had, because I thought. Sorry, is this working?
Yes.
I thought that there was, because the first time I attended an Episcopal church was actually in Edinburgh. I went to Edinburgh University, and funny enough, they have no Church of England in Edinburgh. So that's the first time I attended the Episcopal Church, was in Edinburgh. And that was my understanding, was the Episcopal Church had been, somehow there was some blessing, and I'm not quite too sure of the details, but a Scottish bishop came over and blessed the first Episcopal church in America.
You were absolutely right, and I'll just kind of, during the colonial period in our country, the Church of England did not want to have, for us, the colonies, to have local bishops, because that was a way for us to be in control. And so people always, to get ordained, there were only priests. And then after the American Revolution, the Episcopal Church began, and we wanted to have bishops. And so people went to Great Britain, I guess you could call it, to get be a consecrated bishop, but the English, they didn't want to. So we had to go through the back door through Scotland. So you were absolutely right. Your memory is really good. And so they went and kind of hat in hand and saying, this is after the American Revolution, where we just fought a war to be our own country, and we said but we still need your succession. And so that is a really good, it's a high level, graduate level question, for all of you, of how that happened.
Sarah. I was raised in the Episcopal Church in Central Virginia, different diocese, and we were not allowed to have communion until we were confirmed. And when I came here, I was like, oh my gosh, I was like holding my children. And you know, Brad was like tossing, you know, bread over. And so, I mean, I was horrified. And then I had never even heard of intinction. I mean, I thought that's what Presbyterians did. So your experience in the Church of England is not unique to me. I think it's right on. So.
I think I mentioned this last year when I did this. I remember when I taught in New Orleans, and we had an exchange program with a school from South Africa, Cape Town, South Africa, and so the kids came and vice versa, and the kids came and they kept saying, oh, this is in New Orleans, like this is like America. And I said, not really. This is New Orleans, you know, like it's very different. And what I'm trying to describe is like the diversity of the Episcopal Church is it's marked, you know, and it also can be referred to as famously as the Big Tent. And the Big Tent is great, other than sometimes when you don't agree on how big the tent should be, you know. And so those are some of what Johnny was getting to in terms of like his, I don't know, reservations might be too strong of a word, but it's just a reality about the Episcopal Church is that, you know, you think you know, like, oh, this is how we do it, and then all of a sudden you go to the church down the street and it's different, you know. We're joined by the Book of Common Prayer, we're in the Apostolic Succession, and all those things, and yet. I remember when we did our lector training for people to read up here, and someone said something along the lines of like, I was once told that when I read the lessons, I need to do it in the Episcopal voice, you know? And everyone kind of was like, huh? Like, what is that? And then I should have answered it then this way. The Episcopal voice is Ralph Bayfield. You know, when he talks, a former rector here, that's what the Episcopal Church sounds like to a lot of people's minds, you know, and that kind of incredible stentorian, that's Ralph, you know, that's not everybody, you know, but I think and none of us can do that, so that's okay. And so we end up being like approximations of that. And so I think we might have time for one question or. You all. This was wonderful. Thank you to you all. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, the Scotch bishop consecrated Samuel Seeger. Yeah. Okay. I think it was 2 or 3 later. Seeger and somebody else. You know, and so really strong. Yeah.